I'm Rungan from the Norse, and let's talk about Tyr. Okay, Tyr. Now this is a big one. Tyr is a very ancient god. We don't know a lot about his family and where he comes from. There's like some source that alludes to Odin as being his father, which is kind of really ridiculous in my opinion, or Hyman, this Jotun. The thing is he's so old and ancient. He really existed before we see Odin coming to the forefront. And I'll get into that in a minute. But he is the god of law, justice, and sacrifice and war. Now, and I'll give you my slant on that, what I think about that. The thing about him is he is so ancient, and because we don't know a lot about him, there's no mention of him having children that I know of. Maybe there's some really good scholars that are aware and that I'm not, who know more than me for sure. But as far as I know, and then there's not a mention really about his wife. We do see it in the Lokasana, where Loki is taunting him and being like, I banged your wife, woo woo. Which, you know, Loki just went off the rails in the Lokasana, which is really awesome and very eye-opening. But there's really no name given to her, so we don't know. But I'll get into where we think he comes from in another way. But first, he, being the god of law and justice, was the god of the Thing. So he's an Aesir god, and we know the Thing was where the Aesir would meet communally and discuss and execute laws and decisions and that type of thing. And then the Scandinavians and Germanic tribes took that over. They do the thing. They do their big one. They also acknowledge the Thing. In fact, I think it's still up in the Hebrides, or one of the islands that Vikings kind of settled up there in northern Scotland, where they still actually have a Thing. They might have it in Iceland too. You guys know more than I do about that. But he is the ruler of the Thing. He is the one in charge of this law, this justice. And that is because, guys, as modern man evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, we began to see that order and law and structure preserved us. We were able to combine resources. We were able to help one another. And that's a very, very Scandinavian thing too, that the good of the group comes before the good of the individual, and that's practiced in a lot of their laws and in their social structures and that type of stuff. They're not like looking out for number one, or, you know, it's not capitalistic, and that whoever claws their way to the top is the Not that there weren't leaders and people who did that. Of course, power corrupts. Power goes to people's heads, especially when you have a religion coming in that actually tells you it's your divine right to conquer and to control. But anyway, that's another video. So what I want to say about Tyr, he represents that structure, that law that keeps communities safe, that kept us evolving on a more forward path. You know, I was watching, all I watch is documentaries half the time, and you know, some of them are whack. But this one was an archaeological one, and they were talking about prehistoric man. They were talking about Neanderthal versus modern humans. Did they kill each other off? Did they kill them out? And we know that there was interbreeding because many of us have Neanderthal DNA. So obviously there was some reproductive stuff. So why did the Neanderthals go extinct? And one of the hypotheses is that Neanderthals were so much smaller in population. And when you have a large population, the chances of survival are so much greater. And then kind of absorbing into themselves the other species, so to speak. I use that word loosely because there's debate on what the word species even means. But as far as that, also there's this communication of ideas. You have a bigger source, a bigger pool to get answers to problems from, to share technology from, to get advancements, and somebody builds off of that, and then they skyrocket forward into modernity. And so that's why they think probably the Neanderthal were absorbed. But my point being, I just go on these tangents in my longer videos, sorry. My point being that Tyr represents that structure, that order, that allows for people to share resources, to share protection, to be able to live in a peaceful way without just every crazy person wanting their own will, their own thing, and having complete chaos. Loki has a purpose, right? We know that chaos is part of nature. It is needed, but you can't sustain it. It can't be a way that you exist all the time. And if you do, and if you value that, you probably struggle a lot in your life. But anyway, so we need that balance. We need it, but we also need chaos to resolve itself and to work it out. And that's why we see Loki, another video, I know. Oftentimes he's the one that solves the problems that he starts for the other gods. So as we see reflected in nature, our number one teacher. So yeah, but there's another aspect to Tyr. Tiwaz, the rune Tiwaz, which looks like an arrow. I kind of think it looks like a pine tree, but that's me. I like to see the trees and everything. It's an arrow, so he's dubbed, this god of war. But maybe the type of war he is a war of justice, like a protection type of war, or a retaliation type of war, not necessarily a war for one's own gain, for one's own manipulation and clawing to the top. That, later when Odin, who I love, but later when Odin comes in, you see it's more of a manipulated type of, I'm in it for me type of energy, and he becomes the god of war. Tyr is supplanted. So but we still refer to him as a god of war, of course, and that is his ancient symbol. But I think it's more, this is my opinion, guys, my opinion. I'm just telling you what I know and my opinion. I feel like it's more of a just type of thing. But I suppose you could rationalize anything you want to be just if you want it bad enough. So there's that too. Anyway, because of this, the self-sacrificing, we know that Gleipnir was created, that magical chain made with these incredible magical elements, like the footsteps of a cat. Well, you can't really hear that. So how could it? That's the whole point of that magical chain, that it was so obscure, created with these things, that's what made it powerful. So let me back up a little bit. The gods knew the foretelling of Fenrir, this chaotic, crazy monster who was the love child of Angrboda and Loki, was to kill Odin at Ragnarok. So the gods were like, we're not having this, not going to get our bro. And so they tried to bind Fenrir, thinking they could put off the inevitable, but he would break through the bindings. Finally, they get this from the dwarves, this beautiful chain, this magical chain Gleipnir made to bind Fenrir. And, Fenrir's, he's onto it. He's hesitant. He's like, oh, no, you guys are always trying to, I'm not dealing with it. And they're like, no, for real. We're not going to try to bind you. We just want to put this on you. And he said, okay, listen, you guys can put that chain on me if one of you puts your hand in my mouth, because you know what's going to happen if you're lying. Tyr, this ancient, incredibly protective, just energy, I love it so much, was like, I'll do it. And the message there is uphold justice even at great personal loss. The greater good is more important than selfish gain or the needs of the individual. And that is such a Scandinavian theme, even today in their social systems and everything, as I've mentioned a million times. So it does bind him. Fenrir's pissed, bites off Tyr's hand, and he is then known as the one-handed god or the one-armed god. So he knowingly sacrificed for the greater good. That is incredible. And we see this. What about Nazi Germany, right? It wasn't just Jews who were in the concentration camps, although they were the target and by far slaughtered the most. There were other people, German people. The Jews were German, but there were other non-Jewish Germans. There were people from the Netherlands. There were people from Denmark. There were so many other types of communities that, because they resisted or stood up for justice, got sent there too, apart from anyone who was different, like homosexuals and people who had learning disabilities or any type of infirmity. We don't need to go there, and the list goes on and on and on. But my point in all of that is the idea of standing up for justice, even if it's at personal risk. Could you do that? Could you do that? Could you risk your babies, your loved ones, to hide someone in 1939 Germany? Would you do that? Would you put yourself at risk? Yeah, absolutely. I would. Would you though? Think about it. And there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people who did that. That is Tyr. That is what he was about. That was upholding justice, even at great personal cost. So that is what I want you to think about when you think about him and what he represents. Now, let us talk about his roots, so to speak. So, we know that he dies in Ragnarok. The Tyr, the mythology, is he dies at Ragnarok, killing Garmir, a hellhound, a hound that guarded the underworld. They died destroying each other, so they kill each other. That is how he ends in the mythos. But let's talk about his beginning. So the Romans would refer to him, like when they came into the Germanic tribes and saw what he did and stuff, they were like, oh, he's Mars. He's just like Mars. And they had a way of just like, they were really good at that, being like, oh, that's so-and-so. Yeah, well, that's so-and-so, like we have. They were really good at being able to convert things. And then when they converted to Christianity, it absolutely makes sense. It's like, oh, Isis, that goddess, Circe, that's Mother Mary. That's Mother Mary. So they even carried that over when they converted to Christianity. So they just had a really good talent for doing that. So they kind of viewed him as like being Mars and they called him Mars of the Ting, because that is how they associated him. But linguistically, and that was that time period where they were trying to conquer the Germanic tribes. But let's go earlier. Let's go where did Tyr come from? And that's what I want to address. So while Zeus, while Zeus and Tyr are not connected like in the mythos, when we read about it and what Snorri wrote down and things like that, he's not saying, oh, he's Zeus. It's not in that mythos. However, they share a common linguistic root. And we know now, all these years later, that that's how things connect and evolve. So oftentimes, if you study religion, if you study spirituality, if you study all those types of things, archaeology, all those things, you know that oftentimes there's like a base, and then as people, of beliefs, and as people expand around the globe and are affected differently by their environment and their circumstances, they bring those beliefs with them, but then it changes a little bit. Like there's, and I'm not trying to say these are all connected, but I'm giving you an example of what might appear that way and possibly could be. There's a hammer god or an axe god everywhere. Even in Africa, they have a deity that is, he's that dude. Makes you wonder, right? And we know that we do kind of come from this central place as humans, and there's migrations, and people come back and go back, and there's different time periods and different ages for different migrations, but people bring their beliefs with them, and of course they change. You know, I live in Florida now, they're talking about there's almost like a new dialect happening in Miami because of the way we talk. And my half of my family, a good part of my family is Cuban. I'm not ethnically Cuban, but I'm married into our family, and my grandchildren are Cuban. And yeah, so I pick up lingo too, because I'm around it. It's what humans do. It's what we do. You know, did you ever go to the South for a long time? Then you start talking like them. You go to New York, you start talking like them. It's just how humans evolve and how they integrate. So this common root, he shares a common linguistic root or ancestor, language-wise and mythologically wise, okay? And this is from a prehistoric religion. We're talking like Proto-Indo-European. And this is so long ago. So we know in Old Norse, we have Tyr, and then in Greek, we have Zeus. So what we found is they derived from a reconstruction of Deus Father. And so when you take Deus in Old Norse, it's translated into Tyr, and in Greek, Deus is Zeus. Okay? And so this evolution comes from this very old sky father, and that's what it even means. That's what that's about. Sky father, or this protector in the sky. And it's very old, but it also seems to go along very much with our Tyr's character. Now, chief of the sky, he was chief of law and justice. See how we see this going? Zeus was the big kahuna, and many believe that Tyr was the big kahuna before he was supplanted by Odin. Another thing is, Zeus kind of evolved into the Roman deity Jupiter. So even though Jupiter says, or even though the Romans called Tyr Mars of the Thing, linguistically, way before that, that's where we see Jupiter, Zeus, and Tyr all kind of coming from this same thing. Chief of the sky, sky father, law, justice. So, and we also know that later on Mars was associated with Odin, and that's where you get Mercredi, which is French for Wednesday. Wednesday is Odin's day, so there's some linguistic type of connection there, but that's a whole nother thing. And I got to brush up on my facts about that. But anyway, my point is this. Tyr may be way older. He may be the original OG. In fact, dare I say, probably most Norse scholars kind of think that there's evidence for that. I'm not going to say that they know that to be a fact. Absolutely, how do we know things? But they think there's a lot of good evidence for that. So I hope I put him in a different light for you. And understand, as far as like Odin supplanting Tyr, you know, we live in a time period where that's just a couple thousand years ago, a few thousand years ago. That's such a short time in history. So we see, this transition type of stuff. But thousands and thousands and thousands of years from now, should we still exist here, Maybe it evolves into something else. So it could be that there's just not memory about this because it was so old and so ancient. Look, modern humans have been at least 300,000 years on the earth, and now newer findings are they think they even have to push the date back farther for that. Do you know what happened back then? Do you remember? So much is lost. So you have to not take things literal. Remember, we don't have sacred texts as in a Quran or a Bible or the Talmud, where it's holy scripture inspired by a divine being. They believe, I respectfully say. We have an account of things, of stories and memories that are told to us. That's different. So it's not like you quote the Havamal, that's not how it works. That's like leftover from our Christian lens and influence that we have. We think that a deity is this higher, better thing, and we must serve it, and we must, like how a deity is in Christianity. We think that texts and history should be quoted and observed literally, or even like, so firmly, just like the Bible would be to Christians. It's, even if you didn't grow up, it's part of the West culture. So we tend to view Norse paganism through that lens. And in some ways, Snorri did too. However, he was much closer to the old memories, which is why he was able to write a lot of them down, than we are today. So, hope you learned something. I love you guys. Thank you for watching this video. And tack så mycket.